6 minutes.
Minister, you're very welcome today. So it's a privilege for me today to speak on this bill, and it's the beginning of something really exciting and working towards a cleaner and more sustainable future. It's going to strengthen our statutory framework for governance of climate action by the state in order to achieve climate neutrality or carbon neutrality by 2050. It'll drive the implementation of that suite of policies that will help us as a nation to achieve those goals. It's a really exciting time, and I was thinking about this yesterday, about how far we have come, and it brings me back to the late 90s when I was in school and I was so frustrated with the waste that we were producing, and I began a campaign and a petition for a recycle bin and that's how basic it was back in the late 90s, and it was such a new concept to my school that I had to start a campaign for a green team. And my goal was to get people to understand the importance of reducing waste, reduce, reuse and recycle, those three words that we come to know so well, protecting our environment, etc. And taking part in those projects regarding the destruction of our air and water quality. The simplicity of my school project pales in the comparison of the children's green school projects now, and they're so far advanced from what we were 20 years ago, and it is really, truly wonderful. I suppose this bill is not really for us, it's for our children, and it will result in our children growing up and growing older in a far cleaner and better country. We are all accepting that there is a huge urgency to address climate change, but I stress it must be in an equitable and sustainable, fair way. People are happy to take actions to deal with the issue of climate change, and I know the only downside for people is the fear that they won't be able to afford to survive. The state has a huge, huge body of work to do to actually bring about climate justice, and I know older people and people on lower incomes are very worried about the costs that's going to put on them, and we know fuel poverty is one of the biggest concerns globally. This fair and equitable transition is critical to bringing people with us. Climate adaptation cannot just be for families that can afford to be climate neutral or have the privilege to afford an electric car or a sustainable option to heat and power their homes. It is not a luxury, it is a necessity, and we need to work really, really hard to ensure that no one suffers because they cannot afford the upgrades or the transition. And we need to ramp up our investment into retrofitting, being far more creative in how we enable citizens to upgrade their homes. It is not a time for piecemeal changes. Sometimes there is a lot of perceived hypocrisy, and so many people see, for example, raw sewage going into our waterways, the lack of proper incentives to reduce our waste, the lack of movement and the banning of smoky fuels, the EU signing up to the Mercosur deal, bringing beef into Europe. These contradictions and hypocrisy gets people's backs up, and it really reduces so often their buy-in to creating a carbon neutral, when really in their gut they want to create a carbon neutral state, but they're afraid of the consequences on them financially. I need to put on the record as well that often our country, that our rural Ireland is used sometimes as a scapegoat, and our country is predominantly rural. It is our mountains, our rivers, our farmlands, our forests that are the capital and the most basic of infrastructure for what we need to fight against climate change. And I genuinely am sick of some sections, some stakeholders placing the blame on all the responsibility on the feet of rural dwellers. Rural Ireland and our rural farmers, blaming one-off housing, blaming farmers who, with assistance and support, can continue to improve to safeguard and protect the natural environment and therefore reduce and sequester our carbon emissions. Let's not forget that our agri-food sector is one of the most efficient, sustainable in all of Europe, if not the world. The agri-food sector of Ireland is one of the most important indigenous manufacturing sectors, accounting for employment of around 167,000 people. It includes almost 700 foods and drinks firms throughout the country that export food and seafood to more than 160 countries. Economic activity in the agriculture and food sector produces a far bigger return than the equivalent activity in other traded sectors of the economy, and that is because the agri-food companies source 74% of our natural raw materials from services from Irish suppliers, compared to 43% for other manufacturing companies. we will ask our farmers, we will ask our citizens, we will ask everybody to make huge, huge changes. And we will also ask our multinationals to make changes. But to ask a farmer to make changes and ask a multinational to make changes, they're not comparable. And most farmers in this country are small, family-owned farms. And I'm sure if the state invested in research to find out how much carbon one of these small family farms produce and then sequesters, I'm sure that we would find out that most are indeed carbon neutral. So I think it's really important that we protect our environment, but also protect this indigenous industry we have. It's our largest industry, our one that I'm very proud of. I come from a family of very fine beef producers and lamb producers in the Cooley Mountains. But if I consider what we produce, what we do, and I look at the land, I look at the hedgerows, and when you consider what an ash tree can sequester on an annual basis, it's considered up to 60 kgs of carbon, and research shows that it takes 23 kgs to get a beef cow to slaughter. Now, you know, there's a lot more ash trees on a farm than there is beef cattle. So I just think that it is not a simple matter. We have so much work to do, and I really hope that, my time is running up, but I think just finally, even in 10 years' time, if we turn around and we see that there was a mistake in the scientific, in the maths, and that climate change isn't an emergency, we will actually result in a far better country for us. We'll have cleaner air, cleaner water. So it's a really good thing that we're getting this bill, and it is a fantastic bill. I just think we need to ensure we protect the vulnerable and protect our rural Ireland. Thank you, Minister.